So the idea behind this session really came out of a lot of the work that we do at Innovate Calgary and with various other ecosystem partners. We do a lot of training of companies, put them in front of investors, and teach companies how to put together a pitch deck, articulate their value proposition, things of that nature. But what we usually don't do is look at the other side of the equation, which is the investors themselves. We've had a lot of investors come to us over the years and says, I want to diversify my portfolio. I want to start investing in other opportunities outside of my core field. And in Alberta, that tends to be oil and gas, but sometimes it's fintech and other things. And certainly life science is one of those opportunities that is set to explode in Calgary right now in the next few years. We're putting in a lot of resources from every level of government. We have two world-class educational academic institutions in Edmonton and Calgary that's building this pipeline of really cool and interesting technologies. And then we have the Life Sciences Innovation Hub that facilitates all of it and allows startups to conduct their R&D, very early stage R&D on the cheap, so they don't have to have a lot of cost at the beginning to set up a lab and conduct their research. So with that, we decided, okay, what we need to do is educate investors on what it takes to do kind of a preliminary screen on life sciences opportunities. At the end of these webinars, no one's going to necessarily be an expert. You're not going to be able to do the due diligence by yourself, but at least when someone starts telling you about some of the things, you understand the language and you understand some of the timelines and risks and inflection points. So initially, this was supposed to be an in-person conference, a whole day dedicated to teaching investors how to screen opportunities. That was supposed to happen in May of this year. Obviously, because of COVID, it was canceled. We still plan to do a whole day session where we go into a lot of these topics in detail and really have a lot of content that you can walk away with and say, you know what, I now have a much better sense of what it takes to invest in life sciences opportunities. Today's session is really the virtual format of that. It'll just be an hour session where at a very high level, we kind of have a panel discussion on what it takes to build an ecosystem, what it takes to, hot areas in the life sciences that you could potentially invest in and what life sciences actually means to a lot of people. And then James was going to be talking about kind of transitioning your portfolio from other fields into life sciences. So that's kind of what I want to say in terms of an intro. What we're trying to get back from you guys at the end of this session is feedback. Did you like the format? Do you have any topics or questions that you would like us to cover over the next few webinars until we can actually hold an in-person session, likely sometime in 2021? And we'll send out a survey at the end, and I'll mention this again at the end when the session is finished. A couple of things. This is obviously an invite-only session. It's targeted at high net worth individuals, VCs, anyone who might actually invest in life sciences opportunities. It will not be an opportunity for to see companies, so there will be no companies at any of these sessions that are going to pitch to you. It's purely for your own education. Kind of housekeeping rules. Please mute your mics. If you have any questions, you can send the questions directly to me via a private chat in Zoom, or you can send them to as a public chat. We'll paste all the questions in a working document that we have, and then Alice will screen those questions and then ask the audience. So with that, let me introduce our moderator, and most of you who are involved in any kind of entrepreneurship or startup ecosystem have probably met Alice through one interaction or another because she's very, very active in the community. She's a successful entrepreneur and a dedicated community leader and mentor. She's currently the site lead at the Creative Destruction Lab Rockies, where she works with Canadian academic, government, and investment organizations to help accelerate technology companies with the potential to transform the world's social, industrial, and economic landscape. As a technology entrepreneur, Alice led the groundbreaking SaaS companies for global retail profits such as Walmart, Home Depot, and Lego, earning her national recognition with Profit W100's designation as one of Canada's top female entrepreneurs, and Alberta Venture as one of Alberta's 50 most influential people. Alice is the co-founder and director of the 51, a financial platform for democratized access to female capital for female-led businesses. Serves on the board of Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund, Scientra Diagnostics, and is the former board chair of Startup Calgary and the A100. So with that, please welcome Alice, and she'll take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Nima. I am absolutely delighted to have been asked to participate today and to moderate. Although I have to say, I'm not sure that on the cheap and commercialization of life sciences technologies that actually go together, but we're going to dig into that today as we learn we have three really just fantastic panelists today. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and just in terms of format, I'm going to go introduce our first panelist. Then I'll introduce our second panelist and our third panelist, and then we'll have questions at the end. So we're gonna, as Nima mentioned, go ahead and put those in the chat, but make sure that you are participating that way, because that's really what will engage us in an awesome discussion at the end. So with that, let me introduce to you Dr. Don Rose. Don has extensive experience in launching and building life sciences startups, most recently as the director of the University of North Carolina's Kickstart program. At UNC, he helped spin out 80 companies that had gone on to raise over $500 million and published Research to Revenue, a practical guide to university startups. In addition, he's a professor of practice at UNC's Keenan Flagler Business School, teaching entrepreneurship. Prior to UNC, he held senior leadership roles at a number of life sciences startups: Metabolin, Derek, Fluidics, Data-Centric Automation. Before that, he was a partner with Catalyst Partners, now Hatteras Venture Partners, where he's a special advisor, where he co-founded Phase Bioscience. Dr. Rose received his PhD in analytical chemistry and has a BS in nutrition from the University of North Carolina. He holds 6 US patents that Don has been instrumental in enhancing the robustness of the North Carolina ecosystem by bringing together academia, industry, and the investment community. Never one to hang around it. Don is currently developing another life sciences hub, this time in Baltimore with the Johns Hopkins University, and is a leading advisor to the life sciences real estate venture in the US. And so with that, Don, may I turn it over to you to share with us your experience in building a robust life sciences ecosystem.
Don, you're on mute.
I think we have you on mute. Yep.
Unmute myself. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today from North Carolina, where it is very hot. I don't know what 98 degrees converts to in terms of Celsius, but we're boiling down here. Most of my remarks will be around Research Triangle Park, where I've spent most of my career here in North Carolina. It is a evolving ecosystem in the life science world. 30 years ago, it wasn't even on the map, and I'd say now we're definitely in the top 5, if not the top 3 of kind of life science ecosystems in the US. I've also been spending time in Baltimore, as was mentioned, to understand better what they have there, and I'll come back to that in a little bit in terms of why I'm in Baltimore and what I've been doing up in the Baltimore area. But what I want to do today is just give you some kind of general remarks about ecosystems, and especially as it relates to life sciences, some of which may apply to the Calgary area, some of which may not, but just my experience in terms of kind of what pieces kind of go together to create a successful ecosystem, and be thinking about kind of which of those pieces do you have today, which of those pieces can you increase and continue to develop to create this ecosystem. So the way I like to think about it is in terms of kind of 3 big elements. If you want to think of it as a 3-legged stool, that's fine. But kind of the 3 elements that have to kind of come together to create a vibrant ecosystem are: the first element is kind of the innovations itself, the science and technology. The second is the kind of the people side of things, the management and the talent. And the third, which is probably the most relevant today, is the risk capital that has to come to kind of fuel the engine of development of these companies. So I'm going to walk through those and just some brief remarks, and I can take questions later at the end of this webinar if you have any to address any of these in particular. So let's talk about the substrate, the thing that kind of builds the ecosystem, and that's really the science and technology. that comes out of typically university and government research labs. And so we'll have some more specific remarks about that from our other speakers who have been involved in those sort of translational efforts. And you'll hear the word translation sometimes, and that's really this idea of how do you take basic research and translate it into a commercial product or into a successful company. And so that happens at really the interface of a university or a government research lab and the private market. So it's a unique kind of transition going from one to the other, and it's requires some support as that goes through. So some of the support has to come from internally from those university or government research labs. Some of it can come from the outside in terms of accelerators and things of that nature. But typically what you'll find is within an organization like a university, some sort of translational engine that helps prepare the technology for the commercialization. And that preparation really is a matter of kind of de-risking or validating the technology, especially in the life science area where you have quite a bit of risk associated with the commercialization of the technology. And when I say technology, I mean writ large. It's kind of the basic science that is being embodied into a product. So the second part that is involved in kind of the science and technology piece is a commitment by the institution to help protect intellectual property. And so there's lots of controversy and lots of challenges around an institution, a university institution, to protect and file for patent protection. It's a losing game in many senses. So there's a lot of universities that won't take that risk, others that will, and so it's a matter of whether they can protect it. And they have to protect it in order to create the value. Investors won't invest in things that don't have intellectual property protection, especially in the life science area. Another part of this kind of successful science and technology translational process is favorable licensing terms. And so University of North Carolina, I was fortunate when I came on 10 years ago, they had just launched what they call their express license. It was a license for startup companies that had set terms and a template sort of license agreement so that you can, so a startup company can negotiate the license very quickly without a lot of expense or time. And so you could just fill in the blank, and within weeks you could have a license to a technology. So no upfront costs, payment of patent fees later down the, everything was backloaded to a large extent. And so many of the universities have taken that on, but that's a critical piece to help get these startup companies out of the university. The other thing is to make the technology available to a wide audience in an attractive way. So there has to be a certain level of marketing that an institute has to do in order to make the technology appealing to people. And it reminds me, when I first took this position at UNC 10 years ago, I was at a conference and there was an investor from Kleiner Perkins who was in the audience and asked a question to the panelist of tech transfer people from universities. And the question was, is your job to pick winners or to create a better fishbowl? And I thought that really kind of nailed and really put in context what the university's position is. And that is to really create a better fishbowl, to create a better way for people to look in, to see what's available and not try to pick winners early, because there's just too much risk to be able to pick the winners. So that's kind of the science and technology piece. In terms of people, obviously for bringing people on board to help grow these companies, many times it's kind of a stage appropriate talent that you're looking for. Many times we'll see people who are kind of starter CEOs that are just there to help get things started and get the company launched. They're probably not going to go very far in terms of taking a company public or really building a company, but they're really talented at kind of herding the cats early on. And those people can be working part-time even in those early stages to kind of help things along. And so identifying those people is really important. And what we found were people who were consultants, and maybe they had half of their time paid for by their consulting, and then the other half was working for equity, and that they would work for these startup companies and help get them off the ground. And where does this talent come from? I would argue that you need to look within your ecosystem, especially into looking at students. Many of the MBA students are very talented and can be coming out of business schools, are interested in startup companies, interested in the life sciences. And if you can mentor them and give them the opportunity to help understand and get involved in the ecosystem, that can be extremely useful. Also, PhD students can be kind of the technical surrogate for the professor in spinning a company out and be the kind of lead technical person. One program we put together was an innovations fellowship program that gave MBA students and PhD students time to work for a year or two on startup companies coming out of the university. And that helped develop this kind of talent pool and kept them from going to other places and kept them within our ecosystem, got them networked in there. At the end of the day, sometimes talent has to be imported. And we've seen that a lot even here in RTP. We'll have CEOs who are flying in from Boston or Washington, D.C. To be CEO of a company. And that works well, especially with more of a virtual situation. So that's something you can think about, is how do you get people to come in to the ecosystem. And finally, risk capital. I'm not going to talk a lot about risk capital because I think other speakers will speak to this, but I would just say in the life sciences, the capital has to be stage appropriate. So obviously very early stage companies require money, but it has to be very small amounts of money to kind of get them up and running. In terms of life sciences, I think for an investor, you either need to be sophisticated about life sciences or become sophisticated about life sciences, or partner with somebody who's sophisticated about life sciences. Because in the life science world, there's a high level of risk or additional risk beyond just the traditional market risk and management risk and manufacturing risk and things of that nature. There's quite a bit of technical risk and FDA risk or regulatory approval risk that's required. And also there's an understanding of the timeline required for liquidity, much longer than other companies. And so if you kind of look at all the different life science sectors, in terms of kind of the highest risk, but also the highest return sector is probably the pharmaceutical and biotech area. And then it kind of goes down from there. So medical devices, less risk, less return, diagnostics, tools and technologies, and then healthcare IT is probably at the lowest end of risk return. Doesn't mean it's not a bad investment. It just means that it has a different sort of risk return ratio. And the thing I'll leave you with is this kind of idea of partnering with folks. So the Baltimore story originated because we were approached by a family office at Hatteras who wanted to bring Hatteras into the Baltimore ecosystem and help invest in Baltimore companies. And what we did was we partnered with that family office. And as part of that partnership, I spend time in Baltimore looking for deals because they recognized that they weren't sophisticated in life sciences, but Hatteras is. And so they invested in our fund. And as a part of that, I'm spending time in Baltimore to help with that. So I'll wrap it up there because I think we've got other great speakers here and I don't want to dominate too much of the time. So thank you very much for your time.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Don. That was fantastic. In fact, I think there was a couple of really key learnings for us as we think about, Calgary and life sciences and us creating an ecosystem. In particular, you talk about the interface between sort of the academic institutions and government organizations and then the public. And I love the idea. Are you there to pick winners? Are you there to build a better fishbowl? So I think that's a good reminder to sort of the roles that we have in this notion of stage appropriate talent and capital. So thank you for that. So I look forward to the questions when we get to the end. So it is now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Lawrence Korngut. Lawrence is an entrepreneur focused on building companies, commercializing world-leading neurotechnologies. He is the co-founder and chief medical officer of Datafinity Health, Inc., a successful Calgary-based digital health company. Lawrence is a partner at Castex Ventures, a Calgary-based company supporting the commercialization in the life sciences sector, and is the director of innovation and commercialization at the Hotchkiss Brain Institute, where he leads efforts to support researchers to commercialize exciting emerging neurotechnologies in clinical use. He is the director of the Calgary Neuromuscular Program and the Calgary ALS and Motor Neuron Disease Clinic. Dr. Lawrence Korngut is a neurologist and clinical neurophysiologist specializing in the diseases of muscles and nerves. And so with that, Lawrence, if I may, turn it over to you to talk to us and share your experience from the lab to commercialization, what you're seeing in terms of upcoming and coming areas, timelines, and key inflection points for life sciences.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you for the introduction. Hang on here. I just need to share the right screen. There we go. Okay. And hopefully everybody can see my presentation here. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. I'm going to be very quick as these are relatively short talks to make room for questions, but it's great to be here and to share what we've been doing and as a community coming together. Don was expressing the importance of the ecosystem, and that's definitely the most important element of what's happening in Calgary and really setting up the companies we're going to discuss for success. And so in terms of life sciences, I thought I would sort of frame the discussion a little bit first in terms of what we're talking about. And I think you're all familiar with this, but we are talking about a range of ways to improve health, to maintain health. I'm going to be focusing on the human biology elements of this. That's what I'm most familiar with. And so we're talking about pharmaceutical companies developing drugs, devices, diagnostic tests, and you know, it's really never been more topical than these days with COVID, right? The importance of rapid diagnostics, the importance of interventions, and so the world is kind of uniting around this concept. Life sciences has been sort of promoted to you know, top of mind for many people, and certainly we're seeing that in the investment world as well. There's a real interest in investment in this sector, medical technologies, and even using digital products for therapy in the form of digiceuticals. And so when I speak about life sciences, I really mean all of those things. You know, I think we are seeing, you know, more and more interest in research and development. All the major pharmaceutical companies, the revenues are steadily increasing as therapies are brought out, as therapies are found that are highly effective, whether it be for cancer, for cardiovascular disease, or for clinical neuroscientific illnesses. And there's really been growth in the sector in that regard. One thing I was asked to comment about was upcoming areas in life sciences. You know, this is a difficult thing to comment on because there are so many areas that are growing quickly. You know, with genetic therapies, with artificial intelligence, as I'll mention briefly. I think the most exciting thing that I am you know, focusing on is the fact that there's so many new technologies that are really converging to allow us to leverage digital aspects of therapy development, along with different other aspects that come together and really accelerate the pace of research. So research that used to take, you know, 10, 20 or more years can actually happen much quicker, and our biology is much better understood. It's much more sophisticated. And so really the message I'm going to give you is that while there are areas of life sciences that are attracting, you know, more popular investment interest or even media interest, COVID's a great example, really it's all about following the science. It's about finding the great scientific opportunities, even in fields that are well established, to move things forward and I think represent, you know, excellent investment opportunities. And so artificial intelligence is very topical these days, of course, and you know, I think as an up and coming area, much of what we're seeing is beginning to include the integration of artificial intelligence, and so that's certainly an area of interest. You know, as you can see in very small logos here, there's a large number of artificial intelligence companies. AltaML is a great example that's been very successful in Alberta, partnering with different groups around the world, and working with devices and increasingly with you know, clinical situations with patients. But you know, all of the major pharmaceutical companies are pursuing this technology, as are all the major, you know, venture capital firms and routine investors alike. One area that is of interest, and I would say the University of Calgary is a treasure trove of amazing commercializable or in the process of being commercialized research and development. We attract interest from all over the world in terms of the world-leading research that is done. I'm just going to comment on one area just briefly in terms of innovative medical devices. And so here's just three companies at the Hotchkiss Brain Institute. Fluid Biotech, which is developing a really game-changing stent for the treatment of aneurysms and other cerebrovascular conditions. Stim Sherpa, which is developing a neurostimulation device for stimulating spinal cord injury patients to regain motor function, sensory function, and bowel and bladder function. And Novus Therapeutics, which is a device company looking to disrupt how ultrasounds are conducted. And so again, I don't want to spend too much time on individual companies, but needless to say, we have more talent and more research than we can commercialize because of the lack of capital in the sector. And so if there's interest in investment, there's more than enough opportunity to invest and to meet with the great science that requires that investment to move forward. And as researchers, they're really, for those of us working in impacting health and trying to change the course of illnesses, there's no better way to proceed than through commercialization, where the rubber meets the road and our treatments can get out to the community and help people. And I think as investors, it's exciting to be part of that journey along with us. And so just to give some local examples, Reservoir Logics has been a tremendously successful publicly traded company now. They operate clinical trials around the world in cardiovascular disease, and really are a great example of how big of a success a local life science company can become. Another great example is Per Santa Maria's work in autoimmune disease. So, such great science that this was licensed by Genentech, a subsidiary of Roche Pharmaceuticals, for $1 billion, even prior to hitting human clinical trials. And we'll talk a little bit about that journey of a technology from preclinical work, where the researchers are trying to sort of figure out exactly how best to proceed through into the human clinical validation work, clinical trials, and sometimes even early science gets picked up for large amounts of investment, because it's just so compelling and it is so groundbreaking and so world-changing in terms of the impact it will have on patients as it moves forward. And and thank you to Amplitude Ventures for helping provide this slide. This gives a sense of the journey. We wanted to outline a little bit about how long, because people are concerned about investing in life sciences, because it's a 10-year investment. I'm going to be locked up in this one company for 10 years as the company figures out, is this a useful treatment, over time? And that's really not the case these days. There are various timelines. Sometimes investments can just be for a couple of years, 2-3 years, depending on what the development program is, what stage of development the treatment or the diagnostic is at, or sometimes it can be longer. And so I'm going to try to illustrate that with these slides just very briefly. So often it takes a year, sometimes a bit longer to identify. And so the way we begin treating a disease typically is we find the target. What causes the disease? What is a modifiable target within the body that we can then aim at to modify that disease and slow it down? Then leads are identified in terms of what compounds or what therapies, exactly what molecule. And so that can take a couple of more years. Usually around this time, investors are becoming interested, or investment is being sought. Preclinical studies then proceed looking at the safety of a new compound to make sure this molecule should and can be put into human studies. And that often will take a year, sometimes a bit longer. And this is usually the point at which a considerable capital is required to conduct these safety toxicology and sort of measurement studies of the molecule being passed into the blood and what it does to animals. And you can see that, Zymeworks is a great example of a company from Vancouver that it did a public offering prior to entering human trials with a valuation of $324 million. And so, what we need in Calgary in terms of the investment landscape is really investors to support us in these early steps, like these very early stages where lower amounts of capital are required, and of course the returns are much higher for investors if the company is successful in moving forward. But often the valuation can rise dramatically. Again, with the example of Parvis that I just mentioned with the $1 billion deal with Genentech. Then there is opportunity even for investors to exit after that stage, prior to the human clinical trials going. And the basic dynamic is the longer you hang on, the higher the valuation can rise. But there's risk, right? Because there's risk that at any stage there can be a failure, or there can be an issue that's identified with the therapy. And so moving into phase 1 studies, these are trials where we take healthy individuals usually and administer the compound in a safe environment to just make sure there's no concerns about toxicity, and then move forward into, and again, you're seeing multiple exit points as throughout this process. And these are exit points for investors, of course, to obtain liquidity, or the company sells at an early stage, or it licenses out. Different events can, of course, occur. Then the phase 2 studies occur, and you can see, the valuations kind of rising over time in these companies where we test the drug or the therapy or the diagnostic in situations where it's patients with the disease of interest, but we're not yet proving the treatment works. And then we move into phase 3 studies. And so you can see that the years kind of accumulating here, but the exit points between the different scenarios, the different phases of the clinical trials. The phase 3 studies, the pivotal study that tells you yes or no, are we going to be filing for regulatory approval by FDA, Health Canada. And then, of course, after FDA approval, often is the biggest gain in terms of the company if it hasn't been acquired by that point. Often companies are acquired by big pharma or large biotech firms before the phase 3 study occurs. So there's lots of business decisions to be made. But I will tell you, our companies look at investors in a strategic way in terms of engaging them and often getting their input in terms of what are the business decisions that need to be made. This whole journey is a marriage of the scientific process of what's best for the science, but it has to be married to what's best for the business. It is an interplay between those two, and having that guidance, that governance, that strategy around the table is very important for our companies. And so thank you to Rahim Nadu for providing this slide. There was a nice summary document by Cambridge Associates looking at U.S. venture capital return, so internal rate of return based on, and these are just averages by sector, and this includes, of course, years of loss, right, where venture capitalists may have lost, had negative returns, and really what we're trying to illustrate here is that biotech, healthcare, early stage pharmaceutical companies have excellent rates of return and highly comparable to other industries, and certainly favorable to many. And so the rate of return is there. But to Don's point, these are savvy investors, right? They know what they're doing. They do robust due diligence. And so trying to recreate that in Calgary to support investors like yourselves, who some of you may have less experience in life sciences or no experience. That experience is around Calgary and can help guide and help through the process, because you certainly want to go in with your eyes open and be aware of what you're investing in exactly and how it relates to the landscape and the competition out there. And let's see here. Okay. And then just as my final slide, just as some key point summary, the life science is a growing sector. There's excellent, strong growth in new Calgary-based companies developing world-leading medical technology, and much of that relates to the hard work that some of the folks around this table today have contributed to the ecosystem, which is growing. One person put it best, a colleague from the University of Toronto, saying, without an ecosystem, you can have a couple of mavericks break through and move their companies forward. But really what you want to do is systematize the process so that the great science can get out and doesn't need somebody who can do everything on their own, that they have partnerships and helping hands around them. And I think we're seeing that acceleration in Calgary now, which is very exciting for the future of life sciences in Calgary. So again, a highly supportive innovation ecosystem to support our entrepreneurs and new companies. There are variable timelines and exit points, so liquidity events can occur even after a couple of years. And again, robust returns in the right circumstances. And the risk is quantifiable. Mitigation strategies are essential, and we're here to help with all of that, as is the rest of the ecosystem. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Lawrence, very, very much. And a couple of really key insights. I think, you know, this notion of that there is now for the first time this interesting convergence of technologies, and we're actually moving from invention to the application of value, and the timeline is shortening and we're having quicker impact. I also love follow the science. As a business person, I oftentimes talk about following the money. So I'm delighted to hear you talk about following the science. So with that, let me please introduce to you our final panelist for the day, James Lockery. James likes to cook new things up. He's an entrepreneur, an investor, and a tireless volunteer. He was the co-founder of the global fintech Wave, which was one of Canada's largest technology exits. His new company, Thin Air Labs, creates innovation opportunities by building venture ecosystems, and he's here right in Calgary, our own backyard. James is an investor and a director of a number of other businesses here in Alberta. He is passionate about volunteering his time to support the development of the innovation community in the province. And he's starting here, as I mentioned. From fintech to gaming to health tech. I have the great privilege of having James join us as an associate in our lab at CDL Rockies, sharing his experience and transferring what we call his business judgment to the early stage companies and ventures that we support. It is my privilege to introduce you to James Lockery, and he will share with us today talking about investing early, managing risks, and understanding health. So from a fintech entrepreneur to a health tech investor, to you please, James.
Thanks, Alice. Good morning, everybody. It's always amazes me when I follow somebody like Lawrence and Don, two outstanding academic minds who are really deep in this area. And I'm just a university dropout who kind of did his own thing. So it's pretty amazing to follow those guys. So I just want to talk about investing and how I look at it in this sector. The first thing I want to make clear is that this process is something that works really well for me, and it's maybe not something that works really well for everybody else. So keep that in mind. Investing is something you have to be really confident in and have a lot of skills around. So this is just what works for me. Moving into health tech from fintech and other areas of business was one that was actually quite an easy step for me to take. I get bored pretty easily, and I need new challenges in my life, and I don't like jumping out of airplanes or riding motorcycles or cave diving and things like that. So I get my adrenaline out of taking risks and making bets with really smart people on difficult problems. And so making the move into health tech was pretty simple, especially as I started getting older and started going, oh, my back hurts, and oh, my neck hurts, and oh, that person that I knew got sick and died, and oh, I'm getting older, and that could happen to me. So I started thinking about how do I mitigate some of my own personal risks by focusing on some of the areas of technology that actually help people. And so it's not saying that fintech is not helpful to people. It can be incredibly helpful. But when you think about all the gains that are made in fintech, that is easily traded away by somebody for gains in their health. So when you think about the levels of impact you can have on people, it was pretty simple for me to say I'm going to go in that direction. One of the things I do is I invest very, very early. So that means I'm taking on the most amount of risk that I can possibly take on in the company's history, and I take it all the way to the end. So I'm a full life cycle investor. I don't like to sell out early in a position. I like to see us go all the way to the end. So that's the way that I start, is right from the beginning and try and take it to the exit point of the business. And so to do that, I have to mitigate my risks, because despite the fact that I'm a risk taker, I don't really like to take risks. I don't like to lose. So I like to make sure that I can take care of all of the problems that are going to arise up in front. So I do that by looking at an ecosystem play. And so we've talked about ecosystems already. The last two speakers have talked extensively about it. And that's one of the things about Calgary that makes me really excited. If you look back into the times over the last 20 years of the capital that has gone into the research institutes and the researchers within Calgary, it's a staggering amount of capital. And there is an incredible amount of IP and expertise that sits under the covers of our research institutes in Calgary that have yet to be exposed to the commercial aspects that they can, that are opportunities for them to go and capture. And so that's what I'm doing, is I'm going and I'm meeting people like Lawrence, who are working on amazing projects, and his peers who have all of these interesting solutions to problems that you and I and our parents and our kids face every day. And I look to them to say, where can we go in the future? And that's where I have to have a little bit of trust in the researchers and the people that are there, that they know what they're doing. So one of the key aspects that I do, no different than investing in any other sector, is I find experts that know what they're doing, know how to build their company, have been dedicated to this problem for a decade or longer, and are now pushing in a direction to commercialize. Those types of people are really significant. Without that foundation in a company that's, especially in a medical company, it's hard to make an investment because you don't know what direction they're going to go in the future. The next thing I look at is, how do we look at product and product market fit within the environment of medical? And it's not too different than what you might see in other parts like a fintech play, other than the fact that you can't have a lot of pivoting going on. So it's much more of a rifle shot to create your product and hit your market than it is in a software play, where it's much more of a shotgun shot, where you're just nuancing your software until you kind of find the right thing, and then somebody says, oh, I like that, I'm going to buy it. And then you just keep selling it. That's not the way it works in medical. So you have to be a little bit more diligent, or a lot more diligent, about how your product development fits into the market and the regulatory process that you may have to go through. So that's one of the things that I look towards. You know, there's two aspects that I look for in that play. The first is the domain expertise of the people that are in the project, the team, the founders, the researchers that are bringing this to market. How well do they understand how they fit into the general market? And one of the things that that really played this out for me is when I was working with Tina Rinker over at Scientra, and they showed me how they developed their testing apparatus to fit into the existing apparatus and test protocols that were already in place across the medical system. And so they did research on what the best way it was to be able to inject their product into the system without creating behavioral change. That type of thinking is critically necessary, because if you have to pivot, that's time consuming, and it can be prohibitively expensive, and it could kill your company. So that's one of the things that I look towards, is the expertise around product development and understanding the market. And that's really no different than you would in any other business. It's just very specific in this industry, where it has to be very precise. So when I look at Calgary and the businesses within it, you know, I've already talked about how we can, how much opportunity there is in the capital that's already been deployed into research and IP creation and the creation of incredible researchers. The thing that I'm also looking for is how large of a market can be addressed by the solution that's being provided. Is this something that's going to be a rare genetic treatment that's going to help 1 out of 2 million people and be able to make that person's life fantastic? It's hard for me to invest in that company. Even though it has a great outcome for those small number of people, it's hard for me as an investor to make a bet in that direction, simply because there's not a lot of return on investment that comes from that. And I like to think about investment from the standpoint, first and foremost, as a return. And the reason I do that is it is a game of money. And to be able to continue to play that game, I need to be able to invest and recover and return more money so I can do it again. And so return on investment is one of the most important things. And that's why I choose large markets like cancer, heart, brain, all of those issues that have prolific problems across medical problems across large populations that need to be addressed, and the technology is moving in that direction. So the large market aspect of making an investment is sometimes hard to understand, but it is one of the most important aspects of how you decide which business you're going to back and which ones you're not. And then when I look at risk, it comes down to how do I support the industry around that business. So I'm looking at what does the community around that business look like. So do we have Alberta Health Services engaging with a business? Do we have Foothills Hospital or one of the research institutes working with one of those businesses? Do I have people in my network or within my team that can assist a company going from step A to step B? And that may be in helping build their governance, their board, some of their teammates, those types of things. And does the ecosystem have the entrepreneurs, people, places, and investors to be able to support the growth of this company over the long term? And so when I think about that, that is where I, as an investor, have to invest in the foundation that I bring to the table. Is how can I help both the company and the ecosystem be prolific in helping grow everything and raise all the boats up. And when I invest my time and effort into the community, that just gives me the ability to look 10 years into the future and know that there's going to be more opportunities for me to invest in over time. There is one thing that I've only got one more thing that I want to talk about here, and it's about technology. And so I'm an inventor, I'm a technologist, I'm a computer scientist, and that's really the reason I decided to make the move into the healthcare space. I firmly believe that technologists, especially computer scientists, will be partnering more and more with researchers and medical entrepreneurs to help solve these problems. We're seeing it really move in that direction today. And with the marriage of these two things, I think we're going to see the life sciences space accelerate exponentially as the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning also grows exponentially. And I think over the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to see some incredible solutions to some of the world's greatest problems regarding people's health come to light. And I just hope that we all get to take the time to enjoy that. So that's all I have to say here. I'm sure there's people that could ask some questions. I'm happy to take anything that you guys want to talk about.
Awesome, very good. Thank you, James. And it was interesting. You reinforced a lot of what Lauren said, and especially this notion that we are seeing the convergence of technologies, and life sciences is sort of right at this really interesting sort of precipice. So we have a few questions that are starting to pop up for the panel. So I'm going to ask questions directly from our audience first, and then if there's other ones, I have a list of questions for our panelists. But first question from Pete Fenwick. There's an emerging subset in the digital health called digital therapeutics, which seems to make more drug discovery type regulatory claims. Will the investment requirements and potential returns of this emerging category be more akin to R&D or lower? Don, you mentioned with the traditional healthcare IT, at the far end, you talked about pharma being the most expensive, highest risk, highest reward. At the other end of that spectrum, we have what you described as digital. What examples might the panelists share from their portfolio or experiences? And Don, since you talked about risk reward at the front end at the high end on the pharmaceutical side and to the digital side, I'll turn it to you, please, for your first answer.
Sure, I don't have a solid answer for that. The answer is probably to be determined. It's such a new area right now. It's probably going to be some hybrid because it does require FDA approval, but it doesn't have the risks of putting a foreign substance into a human body. So, you know, that risk of toxicity. I mean, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, there's two sides of the coin. There's the toxicity side, and there's the efficacy side. Does it treat the disease, and does it treat it without toxic side effects? So I think that with digital therapeutics, you've kind of eliminated to a large extent the toxicity risk, but not necessarily the efficacy risk. So it'll be a blend, but again, it's still very early stages.
Lawrence, do you have anything to add to that with your experience on the clinical side?
Yeah, so certainly, as Don said, this is an emerging area. It's unclear from a regulatory perspective yet. You know, I think much of these digital therapeutics are being developed by either, you know, small startups or even large, very large pharmaceutical companies. And they're sort of complementary to the introduction of a drug or introduction of a therapy, and assess, you know, help support compliance with that therapy. You know, and so digital therapeutics sort of vary in terms of the exact intervention of, you know, how, you know, specific is it versus does it complement a suite of other therapies that are more conventional for that disease. And so it's exciting because, as Don said, the risk is low, right? You know, you're not introducing a foreign substance into the body. So, but the question is, what will be the overall impact? What will be the benefit? And so in turn, what will be the return on investment for these companies? And I think that's unclear.
Very good, thank you. We have another question from our audience. And this is an interesting one, and James, I'm going to ask you to start. Can you discuss the concept of your belief of a large market preference versus the opportunity and difference in the rare disease field? So, for example, 1 in 12 people have a rare disease, so rare there is not a rare market. So how do you assess that from an investment perspective? And then Don or Lawrence, either one of you would like to comment.
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, I'm going to give a money answer here rather than a human answer. I think when you think about how we grow capital, we have to approach products that have the ability to reach a large number of people and have those people pay, or some designate pay for those. That's the only way to deliver strong, predictable ROI. The aspect of going into smaller markets, especially for me when I make bets really, really early, is difficult. And, you know, I just can't see the path to ROI versus the risk that we may be taking. And, you know, I think the other side of it is, you know, there's different levels of types of investments you make into this space. We just talked about digital therapeutics. Therapeutics typically are the most costly as far as the dollars that go into investment, and are the highest risks because of the regulatory hurdles that have to be overcome. I typically stay away from therapeutics, and that's probably where that question is leading us to, is into the therapeutic range. So diagnostics, medical devices, that's a step lower as far as risk. That's where I play a lot. And then there's the easier one, which is just basic software that helps medical systems run. And I play in that realm as well, which is more traditional enterprise software. So I don't play as much in that therapeutic area, and I think that's largely because there's few large markets like cancer, heart, brain, that are in that area, and I just don't think the returns are there for focusing on these smaller issues as an investor. At least that's the way that I've seen it in my early stages of investing.
Lawrence, I'm going to give you you know,
Sure.
just a minute to respond to that, and then Don. So Lawrence, a minute to you and a minute to Don, because I think, you know, there is if you know, if there is such a rare market for a rare disease, how do we get these products or these technologies or these therapeutics commercialized so that they can have impact, but a different kind of impact?
Yeah, so you know, I think what James is saying is correct, right? Absolutely. You know, I agree. But I think it also illustrates the opportunity and the optionality out there in terms of, you know, whatever level of risk you're comfortable with, there's likely an opportunity in the life sciences sector to invest. You know, and as Don said, they are higher risk investments as a grouping, but there are ways to identify you know, investments with the level of risk that is suitable for a given investor, and then strategies to mitigate that risk and hopefully increase the probabilities of success for that company. You know, you know, just as an example, in terms of the rare disease space, there's less competition, right? You're not necessarily competing, you know, and for example, a common disease in neuroscience would be dementia, right? But there you're competing with Roche, Biogen, you know, up front, where there are sectors that those companies are not in. They're looking for a young company to build something that they can then acquire. And so it is a risk balance with return. And certainly the more common diseases will have much higher returns, but generally more competitive, and the risk is even higher statistically. But you know, again, there's something for everybody, I would say.
Awesome. And Don, anything to add to that? Or I have a question for you about ecosystem. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just echo those remarks. I think that the positive side of rare diseases is the clinical trials tend to be smaller and more affordable for a smaller company. And then there are lots of partnering opportunities. I think big pharma is always looking for opportunities to get into rare diseases because there's a premium for a rare disease in terms of a payer paying for that. And so you know, partnerships, acquisitions happen very, very quickly and easily, I think, within the rare disease category for smaller companies.
So there is a path. There is actually maybe even a faster path potentially to commercialization at the end of the day in that instance. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there can be. I mean, I think for a small biotech startup company, taking on obesity is probably not a great idea given the size of the clinical trials to fund that compared to a rare disease that only has 10 or 15 patients.
Yes, awesome. Okay, so we are out of time. This has been an unbelievable conversation, and I think, you know, what is interesting is our three panelists actually didn't come together to build their discussions today, but they all sort of leveraged on top of one another, and in particular the importance of what Don talked about, you know, a substrate by which we build an ecosystem, which we build, you know, early stage inventions and startups, and James talking about how do we actually work to actually get capital into those organizations. And so it has been my privilege to be your moderator today. And with that, I would love to turn it back to Nima to close.
Yeah, I would really sincerely thank everybody for attending. Hopefully you found this useful. Like I mentioned at the beginning, it is supposed to be very high level at this point, just to garner interest, and we want to get some feedback from you in terms of the format and additional topics that you would like to see covered in future sessions. So after this, we'll circulate an email. It'll be fairly open form, but we do, if you take a couple of minutes just to provide some of that feedback, we would really appreciate it. And I hope you're all excited about investing in this sector. Like the panelists said, it's one of those sectors where not only can you potentially get fairly substantial returns, but also you're making a real impact to society. And I think those two things combined, actually making the world literally a better place, makes it a very attractive investment. So I also want to thank the planning committee for this, and I want to name each one individually, because without them it wouldn't be possible to plan something like this, and eventually when we hold the real person session, there's actually a much larger committee that we've assembled to plan this. So I'll actually name names: Crystal Phillips from Thin Air Labs, Rahim Nathu from Fluid Biotech, which we heard about through during Lawrence's talk, Kevin Franco from Platform Calgary, Jaspreet Grewal from Venn Consulting, and of course Alyssa Lam from Innovate Calgary. What I want to leave you guys with is that there are resources out there available. All of us on the planning committee can help you in various ways, or connect you with experts or people that can help you if you're thinking about making an investment in this space. Even if you're just looking for deal flow, even if you're just looking for companies to invest in. Obviously at the Life Sciences Innovation Hub, we have a whole bunch of companies that we're incubating in our building. And so if you're interested in having maybe a pitch day or something like that, please let us know. We can try and organize something like that where we put companies in front of you and you can screen opportunities that are interesting to you, either for personal reasons because you have a family member affected by a disease, or you think it's a great opportunity to get a great return. So all of our emails will be circulated as well in that follow-up email. And again, thank you for attending. Hopefully we'll see you at future sessions and sometime in 2021 in person as we host the whole day-long session. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.